But today's archive section is a crash course in Dragons 101. First things first, let's talk about dragon society and culture. So the dragon's government is called the Empyrean. Hey, Nicole, isn't that the name of this book series?
Can I confess to you something? I didn't know that was the name of this book series until a week before we launched this podcast.
And I will say this, it wasn't until after we launched the podcast or started working on the podcast at least, that I knew that the Empyreans were the dragon government. That kind of went over my head there in the first read. Let's think about that. The book series name focuses on the dragons, not Basgiath, not the people, not Violet. It's dragons. So I think that this first book, it was the hero's journey for our main female character. And the second half of the book series is going to focus a lot more on the dragons. We have barely scratched the surface with this dragon culture. And the series name, to me, it's a promise that we will learn so much more. Humans, they don't know anything about Empyrean affairs, and the dragons shield themselves when the Empyrean are huddled together like they do right after threshing, because they do not want their bonded riders to have any knowledge of the goings-ons between them. You'd think that humans not knowing anything about the Empyrean affairs would make this section shorter, right? You must not know us very well. So similarly, the humans have no influence over dragon law. Remember, the dragons are in charge of this partnership, right? It is absolutely a partnership, but there's that one person who's like, the grade A student who's doing a lot more of the extra work. And then there's the humans. Remember, the dragons are in charge of this partnership. We've said on every single episode here, the humans are the pets, the dragons are not. Dragons, they live in the Vale where no human has ever been allowed. If any human does try to go to the gorge leading to the Vale, they will be incinerated. Except maybe there's something going on with those who have rebellion relics. We kind of touched on this a little bit in episode 2, just throwing that possibility out there. The Vale, it is this gigantic valley behind Basgiath War College. So it's located in the center of Navarre, and it's guarded by the cliff that the gauntlet is built into. The power that radiates from the Vale powers Navarre's wards and protects the kingdom from Pormiel's raiding parties and this never-ending war. That's where this partnership really does come in. The dragons need the humans to help channel that power, and the humans obviously need dragons. So this brings me into the next point of our discussion here, the dragon bond. Now, dragons will choose 99.9% of the time, one rider that they deem worthy to bond with for the human's life, or the dragons, because RIP my boy Liam. But why do dragons bond with humans? So they ultimately need one another for protection, right? That's what I was talking about there with the Vale and how it powers all of Navarre, their wards. So dragons bond with riders to protect their home, the Vale, from the enemy. That's kind of what the dragons get out of this, why they're doing all of this that we know of right now. So when a dragon bonds with a human, they channel their magic into the human to create a unique signet power for that human. We will dive way more into the signet part of the dragon bond in a later episode. We're going to do an archive section on signet powers. But for right now, it is important to know that dragons have their own magic, like Andarna's ability to freeze time, which they purposefully do not pass along to humans. That is why baby dragons, they're not supposed to bond, because they cannot control that unique magic of theirs. This unique magic of theirs, it evolves into a new power when they grow. So that is why we can absolutely assume Andarna will not be able to freeze time now that she's grown up. When dragons feel their rider is ready, they channel their power into them via this bonded relic that they get on threshing day. And that channeled power manifests into something unique that represents the rider at their core. Again, so much more on this later. Going to stick to the dragons part right now. So fewer and fewer dragons are choosing to bond with humans in recent years. There's a lot of speculation as to why this is. For instance, are there just fewer dragons in general? Then we, of course, have the popular theory that fewer dragons are bonding because they disagree with Navarre's politics and their quote-unquote out of sight, out of mind philosophy when it comes to the rest of the world being threatened and destroyed by the venom. Or maybe it's even a little bit of both. We don't know that yet, and I can almost guarantee we will learn more about why dragons are not willing to bond in subsequent books. Dragons don't emotionally recover from the loss of their bonded rider, especially when the bond is strong. Dragons don't bond with a lot of riders. Of course, they live for several hundred years. Terran is said to be over 100 years old, and he's considered middle age, and humans obviously do not live that long. So, of course, they will have multiple bonded riders, but there is definitely a little bit of a, if they have more than 4 riders, for instance, kind of like a reflection on the dragon, not necessarily on just like their life's journey, I suppose is the right way of putting it. So let's talk about the rules of dragon bonding, because wow, dragons have a lot of rules. Dragons, they don't beg humans for anything. They don't go out of their way to cater to their rider, and especially any other human who's not their rider. If the rider is too weak to deal with the strength and power that are dragons, then they don't deserve to live. That's just, we all have learned this, and the fact that Taryn is making these accommodations for Violet is just so out there. Rule number 2. Dragons only reveal their full name to their bonded riders. Number 3, they only talk to their bonded riders. Again, we break a lot of these rules in this book.
Yeah.
And number 4, it is forbidden for dragons to bond with relatives of a previous rider. That is why it is such a big deal that Sigale does bond with Xaden, because his grandfather was bonded with her as well. And number 5, which is actually the biggest rule of all, I should have ranked these in order, baby dragons are not allowed to bond. In fact, humans are not allowed to see baby dragons at all. This book's dragons are just breaking all of the rules, but that is big rule right there. Notably, there is not a rule against 2 dragons bonding with one rider, because it has never happened. It just shows, again, how big of a deal this is, not just for the humans, but also for the dragons. That's kind of like the main rules there. Separate from the rider bond, dragons, of course, have mating bonds too. The stronger the bond, the more their lives literally rely on one another. Maiden dragons cannot be without each other for more than a few days, or their health goes south, which is very convenient for our forced proximity here between Xaden and Violet. Now let's move on to the types of dragons. Dragon breeds are distinguished by their different tails and colors. It's my understanding that tails and colors can mix and match, with some combos being far more rare or strong than others. So there are 6 tail types, and I'm ranking them here from most deadly and powerful to least. So first up, we have the Morningstar tail, which is a mix of the dagger tail and club tail, biggest, baddest of all. And then under that, we have the dagger tail. Then we have the sword tail, club tail, and a scorpion tail, and last but not least, a feather tail, which we of course later find out are baby dragons. But humans don't know that. So all they know are that feather tails are mysterious and they avoid violence. They're unstable and unpredictable, like toddlers. And they're not good for bonding because they can accidentally pass their own magic to the human. So, okay, now the colors of dragons and their associated traits. So black, we got the deadliest, the biggest, the baddest, the most powerful species in Navarre. And they are the rarest, minus golden. Again, more on that here in a moment, because none have been born in the last century. Black dragons are also the smartest. They're the most discerning, the most cunning. I think that is a perfect match for our girl Vi. Then we have the blue dragons. They are known for how big they are. Thanks, Sigale here. They are the most vicious of all dragons, especially blue dagger tails, who are the rarest and most ruthless. And while none were willing to bond this year, there are a few blues in active service, specifically where the fighting is most intense in the Espen Mountains. Then we have the brown dragons, and all we know about them is never show fear or apprehension to a brown dragon. Cool. That's all we know right now. Awesome.
Spoopy.
Moving forward. Green dragons, they are known for their intellect, and they are the most rational of dragons, making them particularly great siege weapons, specifically green clubtails. You have to show submission and patience when approaching these dragons. I would imagine that's probably the case for all dragons, but it's particularly for green dragons. And then we have red dragons. All we know about them is that they are the quickest to temper, especially red scorpion tails, and you should never look a red dragon in the eye. And then we have orange dragons, which come in varying shades of apricot to carrot, and they are unpredictable and therefore the most risky of dragons. Now, one thing I do want to point out about all of these different color dragons is that each of them descends from a different lineage. I did not include those in the colors because I am absolutely butchering their names and I don't want Darren to get mad at me. But noting that, for instance, when Taryn gives his full name, he says, the descendant of blah, 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 blah. And then in Darna, she doesn't give any lineage when she gives her name. Why? More later on that. Final thoughts on dragons here for the archive section. Like I mentioned, we don't know a lot about dragon politics, but we are starting to learn that some of them, like Sigale and Taryn, decide with the rebels. And so can we assume that the Empyrean dragon government here is divided in siding with Navarre and siding with the rebellion?
I think they're definitely like they're bonded with their writer and they side with the writer.
And they're so torn. Like they had to have a huge meeting after threshing because they did not approve that Violet had 2 dragons, right? So if they were all on the same side and all like rooting for the rebels or really wanting, Violet to succeed, you wouldn't think there'd be that big of a problem. I think that we're already starting to see a divide between the Empyrean.